World War II shaped the lives of a generation. The war broke families apart, brought communities together, and turned a depressed economy into an industrial machine. On the home front, citizens sold war bonds and collected scrap metal for the factories. Friends were made and lost as a generation of boys was sent into combat. Penn State Public Broadcasting invited those who lived this history to share their stories of World War II.
Well, my full name is Robert Mark Barnoff. I was born in 1926 in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. I was the second child in a family of who eventually became 4 children. My senior year in Punxsutawney High School, I learned that if I completed all my studies during the first half of the year, I could join any of the armed services and still get my diploma. So in January of, that was 1944, I drove through a rather mild snowstorm to Du Bois, where I enlisted in the Navy. Now that was quite an experience for me because my mother was vehemently opposed to it. But she thought I wouldn't pass the physical because I had been plagued all my life with asthma. Actually, I did join the Navy, and it was really a very good move on my part, not only for my health, but I was able to declare my mother as a dependent. So all the time I was in the service, she got a dependency check and that helped her raise my 1 older and 2 younger sisters, and so they survived. And after I was gone, and of course, the big eater in the family was also gone, so they were able to do all right. But that was the main reason I joined, but there were also patriotic reasons, because in those days, everybody, and I didn't know anyone who was opposed to the war. After what had happened at Pearl Harbor, and with the rationing that we had, butter, butter, sugar, gasoline, they're all rationed. We knew there was a war. And everybody was aware of it, and we were all trying to do something, and so the patriotic aspect was there also. They shipped me from Du Bois to Pittsburgh, where they had a processing center, and the doctor who examined me, I would guess that he was in his 80s, maybe his late 80s, and he was a nice fellow, and he was listening to my chest, and I sort of suspected he was having problems hearing, and he says, "Do you have respiratory problems?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm just recovering from a severe cold." So he pushed me through. From there on, they wouldn't let me turn back, so I was in. My first day in the Navy, you might say, they shipped me from Pittsburgh to Great Lakes Naval Training Station. And we arrived there. There were a bunch of us, maybe about 50 from all parts of the United States in this company, and we arrived there at about 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening. Well, the chow halls have been closed. There's no food available, so my first day in the Navy, I missed my evening meal. The next morning, they got us up, and they served us, it was, I believe, cornbread and baked beans, and, of course, coffee. So that was my first experience with Navy food. After Great Lakes, they sent me to Purdue University for advanced training. I had done well on the aptitude tests, and so they wanted me to be a little further advanced than just a seaman. So I studied electricity at Purdue University, a company of about 20 people. And we were there 3 or 4 months, and then they promoted us from Seaman Second, or at least I was promoted from Seaman Second to Fireman First, they call it, which is the highest rank for enlisted men. After that, you're a non-commissioned officer. They asked me what type of duty I wanted. They were giving us some choice. And so I said, "Oh, that's easy. I want to be on a PT boat." So I said, "Fine, you have to take a physical." And of course, in the physical in the Navy, they make you take off all your clothes, and then you stand there, and they tell you do this, do that. And the first station was they examined my eyes. They said, "No, sorry, you cannot be on a PT boat or a submarine or aircraft because your eyes aren't good enough." I said, okay. So I started to get dressed, and they said, oh, no, you have to finish the physical, even though you failed it. But at any rate, that's the way the Navy operated in those days. It was all, a lot of it was humorous, and a lot of it was aggravating. But at any rate, they said, okay, now how about an LST? That'd be a good duty for you. You get good experience. I said, no, I don't want to be on an LST. I made up some story about a friend of mine having been on an LST and got shot up or something, some crazy thing. I said, I want to go out in the fleet. So okay. So they sent me to San Francisco, actually to near Stockton, California, to a receiving station there. And from there, they took me to San Francisco and put me on a ship to go overseas. They didn't tell us where. And the name of the ship was the General M.L. Hersey. And it was its maiden voyage. It was a Navy transport ship designed specifically for transporting Navy personnel from one part of the world to another part. We were in our quarters. We were 5 deep as far as our bunks, and so we took off from San Francisco. Nobody knew where we were going, but we all suspected it was New Guinea. And we went past Hawaiian Islands, a couple hundred miles south of them. Didn't stop, of course. And we were going on a zigzag course the whole way, across the equator. But after we'd been out about a week, they served us one evening meal. I remember specifically. Some of us got ham, some of us got turkey. I don't remember which one I got. But at any rate, one of those items was poisoned, not poisoned, but it was spoiled. And so about 50% of the passengers had food poisoning that night, and it was one terrible mess, as you can imagine, because we were all jammed together. And it was rumored, and I later learned that at least 3 of the people were leaning over the side and disappeared. Now, as I said, we were running a zigzag course. It was night, and we were told specifically, if you go over the side, we'll just say goodbye because we're not turning around. Too much danger for submarines and so forth. So at any rate, finally got to New Guinea and landed in New Guinea. And there, by that time, my pay records were God knows where, and I hadn't been paid for about 2 months. So I was practically broke, but I was able to scrounge up enough money. They gave us a daily beer ration. So I'd buy my beer, and I'd take it over about a quarter of a mile away was a CB camp, and I'd take it there, and the CBs had been there for months, and all they wanted to do was sit around and drink beer. So they would buy my beer at an inflated price, and that would give me money that I could use to buy candy and soap and so forth. From there, they put me on an old, what did they call it, Liberty ship. And it was hauling supplies, and there were maybe 20 or 30 of us as passengers, and they treated us as though we were second-class passengers, put us down in the hold and didn't feed us properly. We'd steal money out of the out of the holds. I mean, not money, steal food out of the holds, like canned milk and cornflakes and so forth, and that way we survived. But after about 5 or 6 days on that, ended up in Manus Island, I believe it was. And there, they transferred me to the USS Trinity, and that was my duty station. I'd like to go back to when I left San Francisco. That was the first of 520 days that I had seen civilization. From then on, for 520 days, I did not see any civilization as we know it. And I was aboard that ship 500 of those days. Only spent one night ashore. I missed a boat after a beer party, and they left me there overnight, and I slept on the beach along with a couple of buddies. But at any rate, that was a long stay on a ship that was 466 feet long and 60 feet wide. My duties, and I got on the ship, I was an electrician's mate. And I got promoted to electrician's mate eventually. We took care of all of the electrical equipment, lights and motors and fans. We did not have air conditioning, of course. It was an old ship built in 1920. And I had already given you the dimensions of the thing, so we could walk from one end to the other, but that was it. We carried oil, fuel oil, diesel oil. And what we did was to service other Navy ships, and not only U.S. Navy, but also some Canadian ships, and some British ships. Anything that happened to come along that was an Allied ship and needed fuel, we did it. We got our oil from either commercial tankers, merchant marine tankers that would come out from either Australia or San Francisco area, and we'd meet them someplace in some safe harbor, and they would discharge their fuel to us, or they would discharge it to tank farms that had been built up in some of these small islands as the Army progressed northward in their quest to finally conquer Japan. And we would go to these small islands and get fuel from the tank farms, then go out and refuel Navy ships. And it was not what you would say an interesting life, but shortly after I got on board ship, my battle station was in a damage control. So what we would do, we would meet at a certain spot on the ship when they called general quarters, and just stand there and hope that nothing would happen, that we wouldn't have to go to work. And but shortly after going on the ship, we were strafed by a couple of Japanese planes as we were pulling into one of these small harbors. Our gunners were not that good because they shot at them and missed them, and the planes flew away after they had finished shooting at us. And so that was my first encounter with the Japanese, and I didn't really like it so much. But at any rate, we kept this up. We were across the equator, of course, south of the equator, and then we moved north of the equator, and then back south, and then north across the equator more times than I know could count. We kept working our way north, mostly around the Admiralty Islands. In the Admiralty Islands, the Navy had built a big repair depot, you might call it, a station in the harbor there. They had two floating dry docks, and these were towed out, and the dry docks, they would submerge these things down to the point where we could actually drive our ship onto it. We would sail onto the dry docks, then they would pick us up out of the water, and then the work would begin. We had to scrape the sides and paint and so forth. So we had just come out of one of these dry docks after repairing some damage we had had, and I was standing watch in the engine room one night on the main generators. Excuse me. And at that time, the island was declared to be secure, which meant that you could have lights, not many lights, but some lights. So I opened the hatches to the engine room because it was very hot, no air conditioning. Let the hot air out of the engine room, and it was way up high. It was about 40 feet up above the deck where I was. And it was about midnight. Chief Warrant Officer, who he and I had a few runarounds, but he and I became friends later. At any rate, called me and called down, and using his rather crude Navy language, said, "Air raid. Just close those GD hatches right now." So they were way up there, and I was way down there, and I knew it would be several minutes, so I pulled the main switch, turned off all the lights in the engine room, grabbed the flashlight, and then went up and closed the hatches. And he thought that was the greatest thing that ever happened. But anyway, the Japanese then had patched up a couple of torpedo planes, and they hit the floating dry docks with some torpedoes right after we had gotten out of them. There was another time we were refueling a couple of frigates and another ship, and they started strafing us, and our gunners couldn't do a thing because they had ships on each side, and they were in the way of our guns, but the other ships shot down the Japanese planes, and this is the type of thing we had gone through. Prior to getting onto the ship, it had been attacked by a Japanese submarine and shot 3 torpedoes at it. The destroyer that was escorting them at the time sunk the submarine. And then they sent divers down and recovered their decrypting machine.
Oh.
So they, from that point on, the Navy knew pretty much what the Japanese were going to do. Towards the end of the war, we heard about the atomic bomb. We didn't know what the atomic bomb was. And one of the officers had recently graduated from a mechanical engineering program, and he explained to us the amount of energy that was stored in one of these things and what it could do. And so we heard about the 2 atomic bombs, and we thought, oh boy, this is going to be great. And then on August the 15th, 1945, the Japanese surrendered. And they thought, oh great, we're going home. We didn't. They kept us there to refuel other ships that were going home. And so we were there for until January of 46. In January of 46, we got our orders. We were in Leyte Gulf at that time. Mm-hmm. And of course, prior to that, they had been building up this huge armada of ships that were going to invade Japan, which would have been a disaster. And so we got orders to go home, and it took us 40 days. We had a typhoon a couple of days out of the Philippines, and probably, which was as bad as Katrina. And we were escorting a minesweeper that almost capsized, and went to Eniwetok. There was nothing there except a small Navy base, or Army base, excuse me. They wouldn't give us any fresh water, so we left the minesweeper there and took off, and finally got to Pearl Harbor, where we had our first liberty, as I said, in 520 days. And the first thing I did was order a good meal. As far as the war, World War II was a war like no other war. I've been told that there were about 200 million casualties if you look at it worldwide, Europe and Asia, Pacific, and so forth. Very few in the United States, of course. But the thing about World War II that was really great is the way it ended. The Germans surrendered unconditionally. The Japanese surrendered unconditionally. The Italians capitulated. And they had to start all over again. They started all over with a better form of government, and they're doing fine. And there are competitors now. Since then, our wars have been disasters. Korea, 60 years, nothing. Cuba, Castro's down there laughing his head off at us. The whole way through, you name any of those so-called police actions we were in, and they were poorly handled. There's only one way to fight a war. You go in, you kick hell out of them, and then you help them build up. And, well, you can only win if you go all out. You cannot do a half measure on these things, just like we did in World War II. Everybody was working on it. Everybody was in favor of it. Everybody pushed to get it done, and we got it done.